Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something big. We're moving together threads from psychology, culture, and even demographics.
Yeah, looking at how they all connect.
Exactly. The goal here is to look at a bunch of sources that help us understand, how we think, how society shapes our ambitions, and maybe even how changes in the family itself might be influencing, well, the modern mind.
Mm.
We've got three core ideas, and they're definitely interconnected. First, this challenge of thinking deeply, that kind of nuanced thinking, and how it can actually feel isolating.
Right.
Then second, we'll contrast how different cultures view success. Think tall poppy syndrome versus relentless aspiration. Big difference there.
Huge difference.
And finally, how shifting family structures, fewer kids, parents being older, might connect to this idea researchers are calling the coddled mind.
And it's crucial, I think, to connect these dots. Our internal feelings, feeling disconnected or pressured, they don't just appear out of nowhere.
Right.
This analysis links those feelings to real external forces like culture and demographics. So let's start right there. With that internal world, that conflict that happens when you really try to think complexly.
Okay, let's jump in. Because there's a real paradox here in the sources, isn't there? We value complex thought, holding multiple ideas, nuance.
You say we do.
We say we do, yes. But the person doing that thinking, they often report feeling, well, alone, cut off.
Yeah, it makes sense if you think about it.
Why, though? Why does thinking deeply make you feel separate?
Well, if you're seeing shades of gray when everyone else sees black and white, or if you question something popular or see merit in opposing views, you automatically step outside the easy group consensus. Nuanced thinking just doesn't fit neatly into simple tribes or categories, so you end up kind of cognitively distant. It's easier to just agree, right?
So you're like a solo operator.
Pretty much. In a world that often rewards just going along.
That sounds exhausting, actually. Choosing complexity means choosing a harder social path.
It can be. And the sources suggest, maybe subconsciously, people often react by either simplifying their thoughts or finding really niche groups where their specific complex idea is, already the norm.
Okay, but here's the twist the sources mention, and this is really fascinating. That private feeling, isolating, but sharing that complexity, that nuanced, maybe even vulnerable thought publicly.
Sometimes it really resonates. Surprisingly so.
Why? What changes?
It seems people connect not necessarily to the complexity itself, but to the vulnerability of sharing that struggle, the honesty.
The shared struggle.
Exactly. When you articulate that messy internal landscape, others who feel the same way privately suddenly feel seen. It becomes this weird, ironic form of connection against simple answers.
So the takeaway is this constant tension. We fear complexity isolates us, but being open about that complexity, that struggle, can actually build connection. That's a key part of the modern experience, you think?
Absolutely. That tension is really at the heart of it.
Okay, let's shift gears then. From the internal world to the external pressures, how does society treat ambition? Because the sources show a really stark difference depending on where you are.
Yeah, we're talking about fundamentally different cultural operating systems here. On one hand, you've got places like the UK, Australia, Canada, where this tall poppy syndrome is a real thing.
Tall poppy syndrome. Explain that a bit more. It's not just envy, right?
No, it's deeper. It's like a cultural pressure cooker for modesty. It kind of discourages people from standing out too much, from achieving too visibly.
So how does that actually work on someone's psychology if you're trying to get ahead?
Well, what's really interesting is how often it's self-enforced. People learn to downplay their successes before anyone even criticizes them.
Really?
Yeah. Like you might get a promotion but talk it down.
Yeah.
Or just not mention a big win because you instinctively know that appearing too big for your boots carries a social cost. You might get cut down.
So you censor yourself?
You do. You apologize for success almost. The culture basically says, we like you better when you're relatable, not when you're way out ahead. The goal is conformity, keeping things level.
Avoid sticking your neck out to avoid getting chopped down. Wow. Okay, that's a world away from the American cultural environment, or at least how it's often perceived. The sources paint that as all about aspiration, right?
Encouragement.
Precisely. In the U.S. context, the cultural script isn't stay small, it's get bigger, think bigger.
Right.
The pressure is on achieving, striving openly, performing success. Go for it, dream big. Failing to strive can almost feel like a personal failing.
But hang on, doesn't that just create its own kind of conformity?
Right.
Like the pressure to always be striving, always projecting success, even if it's not real, that sounds like burnout waiting to happen.
That's a really important point. Both systems create intense pressure, just
Yeah.
aimed differently.
Tall poppy cultures generate anxiety around being too successful, prioritizing social harmony maybe. The American aspirational model creates anxiety around failing to succeed or even just appearing to fail, prioritizing individual achievement.
So neither is easy. It's just about where the friction hits against standing out or against resting.
Exactly. Pressure to shrink versus pressure to inflate constantly.
That distinction's really clear. Okay, final pivot. Let's bring in demographics. How is the actual home environment, the family structure, changing? And how does that connect to handling these pressures?
Yeah, this is where the numbers come in. The sources highlight some key trends, especially more affluent countries. Yeah. Parents are having fewer children,
Right. One or two, often.
and they're starting families later in life,
Hmm.
often when they're more established financially, professionally.
Okay, so fewer kids, older parents, often more resources. Connect the dots for us. How does this lead to what the sources call the coddled mind?
Well, the logic goes something like this. When you have only one or two children, and you have them later, each child becomes this incredibly concentrated investment of time, money, emotion,
Hmm.
everything.
A very precious asset.
Exactly. And so the parental instinct leans heavily towards protecting that asset, towards risk aversion, avoiding anything that could possibly harm this huge investment.
And the sources specifically mention this seems most common in middle and upper class families. Why is that distinction important? Is it just about having the money?
It's crucial because those parents don't just want to avoid risk. They have the means to actively remove obstacles. They can hire the tutor to fix the grade, intervene with the school to smooth over a problem, pay for the extra lessons to guarantee success. They can literally engineer a smoother path for the child.
So it's not just the desire to protect, it's the ability to overprotect, fueled by resources.
That seems to be the argument, yeah. And what's fascinating is this potential link between these broad demographic shifts, family planning choices, and a specific psychological outcome, which is that if a child grows up in an environment where struggle, failure, or even just discomfort is consistently removed by well-meaning, well-resourced parents, they might reach adulthood without developing the internal tools, the resilience, the grit needed for the actual messiness of life.
So when they hit a real wall, something mom and dad can't fix.
The shock can be immense.
Yeah.
Their experience hasn't prepared them for the idea that life isn't always manageable or smooth.
Wow. Okay, that really ties all three pieces together quite powerfully. We started inside the head, the isolation of complex thought needing resilience.
Yeah.
Then we looked outside the cultural demands of either shrinking, tall poppy, or striving, aspiration.
Right.
And now we see how the very structure of the family, driven by demographics and economics, might be shaping an environment that potentially limits that essential resilience, especially in certain groups.
And seeing it as a system, that's the key takeaway, I think. A young person's experience today isn't just personal choice. It's deeply shaped by culture, by economics, by their parents' life stage and decisions. These big interconnected forces.
So here's the final thought to leave everyone with, something to really chew on. If you have a culture like the American one, pushing relentless aspiration,
Achieve.
and at the same time, you have demographic trends potentially creating this coddled environment, especially for those with resources, that might reduce resilience. What happens when those collide?
That's the tension, isn't it?
Yeah. How does someone push to achieve constantly, but maybe lacking the toughness forged by navigating real failure or ambiguity? How do they handle the complexity and uncertainty needed for that deep, nuanced thinking we started with?
It's a powerful question. If we optimize childhood for comfort and smooth paths, where does the strength come from to tolerate the friction and isolation that often comes with generating truly difficult, important ideas?
Something for all of us to think about, that tension between aspiration and resilience. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.